Hey, everybody. Welcome to Campus to Contracts. I'm your host, Brendan, joined by the professional sports agent, Mason Williams. And we are about to dive into the agency's relationship with the team's representation. Now, I say that because my first thought is you just have to talk to the general manager. And I don't think I'm right.
I mean, if you're that guy, yeah, you're talking to just only general managers and managers the whole way through. But for me, unfortunately, I opened this agency up in late 2021, and I've got some GM numbers. I talked to some general managers, but for the most part, assistant general managers are good. Head of player personnel. And then, they got regional scouts. So you start at every level depending on the team and your relationship with that team.
So on one given team, how many of those individuals would you be texting, conversing with? Would you say 4 people on a team, or is it just when you get one individual on the team that's good enough? What's your typical goal?
Okay, so the typical goal definitely is to get to the general manager. The general manager is like, he's the one who, for the most part, on any given team, makes all the roster decisions. So that's who you want to have a relationship with, right? He gets his information from the assistant GM and the head of scouting operations, player operations, and then the regional scouts, college scouts, national scouts, all that stuff, right? It's like tiers. It's like tiers for a job. So the higher the tier you can have communication with that, reaches out to you, you reach out to them, you guys communicate, the better, obviously. So, when I first started, I was just talking to scouts. I'd go to games, I'd meet scouts, we'd share information, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually, when I started getting players signed to teams, some of the players were such a good caliber, I would end up getting the numbers of the general managers or the assistant general managers, and they would end up communicating with me and making decisions on the players and letting me know what they're looking for and all that other stuff. Some guys I've been able to just, been able to get their numbers and reach out to them, tell them who I was, and they would reach out back and say, hey, nice to meet you. I'm gonna lock you in. Please, if you have any of these positions available, please provide them and I'll take a look. So many different ways you can have relationships with the organization, but obviously the higher the better.
The higher the better.
Yeah.
In this sports world, the GM changes happen. They're just part of the sports, the sports beast, if you will. Do you find, I know you've been around since 2021, been around for a little while. These relationships you're forming, you're hoping they blossom into those general managers, those assistant general managers, those kind of people. Yeah. So it's important. It's very important who you're spending the time with at that level. Would you say that's?
Definitely. So even when I just meet scouts, like if I go to a pro day and I meet a scout, I'm going to still talk to the scout. They're just as important as these current general managers. Because like you said, they're going to grow. Eventually, they're going to be the general managers and making decisions and all that stuff. And I might need them. Also, it's good because they might switch to other organizations, to other teams and stuff. So you never know where any of these guys' career paths is going to take them. Also, what I think you should note is that, when you have a relationship with a general manager, they could also move to other teams. And then your relationship will stick with that person. And then you'll be able to have more opportunities elsewhere. So I just think that, the relationship, the entire, carousel of relationships is very important.
So when I look at the importance of what your scouts are doing, how you are kind of informed, how do you help or hurt as an agent when you're talking to these scouts? Because obviously you're promoting the players that you represent, as all good sports agents would do. But I would expect if I'm hiring them as scouts, I would want their opinion, not obviously your opinion. I don't understand, how do you help your player by having those relationships?
Okay, so essentially, when you get to the scouting level, your job and the scout's job is essentially the same job. They're scouting players to place on their teams. You're scouting players to sign and represent. At the end of the day, you're going to be worried about essentially the same things. the character of the player, where they're from, how they are, what position they play, how their production was in college. Essentially, at the base of it, you're looking for the same exact things. Their reasoning is they want to get the best players on their team. You obviously want to get the best players as clients as well, but you're going to be more invested to them long term than a team ever will be. The team is only at the max at the beginning of this thing, is going to only look for you for a 4 to 5 year maximum at the first time they ever see you. 5 years if you're drafted in the first round, 4 years, 2 through 7, 3 years undrafted. So that's just talking about NFL. When you look at some of the other leagues like CFL and UFL, which we call the spring leagues, and but the CFL obviously runs from summer through winter. Those teams are a lot smaller in their budgeting, so they don't have as many scouts. Sometimes the head coach is the GM, so you have to know the head coach and the GM at the same time. Vice versa, sometimes they're separate. So it's important to know who you're talking to, what they want, and hopefully align it with what you have, and maybe get what they want and you sign what they want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say that this is an interesting. You're both connected in the fact that you're both going after similar players, similar talent. And if I'm a scout and you want a player that I believe is highly rated, then I'm also going to trust you more because you're looking at players that I deem to be a possible talent and future for my organization. And if you also agree with me, then we're aligned there. So it's not necessarily you're telling them, this player's great. Okay, I trust you. He has his report of who's he's looking at, and you have your report of what player you want to sign. And when you go over those notes, if there's more agreement, then they know they have somebody who they can trust and rely on for quite a while. And that's also a big part of this whole relationship that you're building and starting this agency for the athletes you represent, but also for the teams, because you're building that trust with them, which will only help your players in the long run. Did I summarize that the way you just answered?
Yes, but there still are so many variables. So, when a scout sees a player, sometimes I might not know what player they like, and my relationship with the scout, they might tip me off and say, "Hey, that's a player you might want to look into. We like this guy. He has good grades, which we call draft grades, right?" Other times, I'll have players that the scouts haven't heard of. And I'll ask the scout, "Hey, do you think you can take a look at this guy and give me a report back and tell me what you think his grade would be?" Now, that's just one guy. That's just one guy's opinion. It's not the organization's opinion. He's going to have to push it up a couple of levels, maybe not, depending on what his ranking is in that, pyramid. So there's a lot of give and take when you meet with these scouts, especially, when they're regional scouts and whatnot. So we can help each other out. We can definitely help each other out in finding talent and giving them talent. What I find happens in these spring leagues and in the CFL is that these are usually players that, they may have been in the NFL, they may not. They may have been drafted, they may not. There's a lot of players that are free agents now. And yes, these organizations do a good job of scouting a lot of players, but sometimes there's too many players that are on the market for them to fully look at. So it is my job to accelerate the process in which they look at these players that I have. It is my job to push these players sort of to the front of the line and say, "Hey, look, you need to take a look at this guy." It's my job to have all the film ready, stats ready, any sort of particular information that they need. I have it already set in my phone so that I can just copy and paste and send it in a text. I know all of the players like the back of my hand. So when an organization asks for a certain player, I only send them players that fit whatever they're asking for. I don't send every single player in that conversation because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for something specific, and I give them something that fits that model or something close to it.
Because you don't want to look at like you're wasting their time.
Correct. I don't want to waste their time.
Here's 20 players. And then they're like, I don't want to sort through 20 players. I have a specific need. So you already match that up. So you're already saving them time there.
Yes.
And the other thing that I always laugh about when I'm trying to summarize it, I try to summarize things to say, oh, see, everybody, this makes a lot of sense. Doesn't it make sense to you that this is all Mason does? He just has this relationship and they get this great kumbaya moment and the player gets signed. And then you go into it, you're like, there's a lot more variables. So it is a more complicated thing than just the relationships. That's just a level of the complications that you deal with on a regular basis. And then there's more relationships and there's player relationships and there's family relationships. So getting into being a sports agent, what would you say would be the top thing that puts you into this spot of success that you thought about, that you're ready to do this grind?
Well, I always really wanted to be an agent. I mean, especially after I was done playing football. So it was always something that I really wanted to do. I wanted to be in sports no matter what, and this gives me that way. And I like it better because, well, not better than being an athlete, but better than all the alternative sport jobs because it's just as competitive for me. I'm good at relationships. I'm good at talking to people. I'm good at knowing the personnel that I represent without actually having to go through my phone and read about them and do all that. Like I know I can name everything about all my players. So when I have interpersonal conversations, when I have conversations in person with these guys, I'm able to rattle off these players that fit exactly what this person's telling me in a matter of seconds. But that's just because I know my players and I haven't overburdened myself with too many players. I do have a wide variety of athletes and entertainers, but I have a certain amount of football players. So usually that's what I deal with. And I'm able to advocate for them the best way I can because I know all of them. I know what they need. I know where they're at. I know their nearest airport. I know whether they have a passport or not. And if they don't, then I have to fix that before I have that conversation with that team that's in another country. Matter of fact, I got a text today from a European country asking for a safety who I think should go, but we're going to have a conversation before that ever happens.
So to put a bow on this episode, communication is probably the most valuable asset that you have. But the other thing that drives you is that competition that you want to be the best agency. You want to provide the best service, not only for the team, but also for your player. So you have a couple things that are happening all at once and going back to, hey, there's more variables than that. And you're also very comfortable in the hard conversations.
Yeah.
You have to be comfortable in that kind of an element because you can't just avoid conversations because you would lose the player, you would lose the teams, you would lose those relationships.
Yeah. It is very important to hold the relationship. It's the most important thing with the team because, the player still has a decision to make, right? I can't just force any of my players to sign these contracts. I could get the contracts and they are still eventually going to have to choose whether they want to sign it or not. Now, usually I try to get that answer before I ask the team for the contract, but I've had situations where players have decided to not go through with the contract or to leave the team suddenly, things like that. So I try my best to keep the relationship with that team because what if that player wants to go back to that team? Or what if I have another player next year that wants to be on that team or that should be on that team? I have to make sure I hold the relationships with the teams accountable, that I have with them accountable because I have future players' jobs on the line, and I need to make sure my relationship with my players are stable because I need to know what's going on in their head and I can best support their careers. Because sometimes guys may not want to go play in certain areas or in certain leagues, and I need to know that. But other times, even though I know that they don't want to necessarily go to that league, they don't have many options left, and I still want them to obtain their ultimate goal. Every football player's ultimate goal is to play in the NFL. That's cut and dry. Everyone should know that. So my job, I see, is to get them from wherever point they're at to that ultimate goal and get them an opportunity there.
I can't thank you enough for diving into this. This, as I think about it, it gets even more complicated because you're not wrong. You can't burn any bridges as an agent, and you don't want a player to burn any bridges because you just never know. They may be back on that same exact team. And so you have to educate your player. You have to educate, the other agents in your office, sports agents, if you will. So there's a lot of information, a lot of moving targets, and to have that competitive spirit like you do, I think really helps. So if you're looking for that kind of excitement, all you have to do is contact Mason, and he'll be happy to do some interviews and see what if you're made of the right salt to make this work. But as I always like to say about the agency or what you're doing is, it seems like you're working on 5 different highways at one time, and you seem very calm about all of it. And for that, I thank you for your time on this episode of Campus to Contracts. And for those young athletes out there, Mason's one of your biggest advocates. And for those teams, he's always available to talk the real talk. So thank you, Mason, for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Campus to Contracts.
Appreciate it.